bill ignores the overwhelming evidence and the voices of experts, psychologists, therapists, human scale educators, home educators, parents, carers, campaigners like all of us, and most importantly, the children. This is where life, death and education decisions are made. The councils do not have the relevant expertise to be making these decisions. This is about money. It's not about our children's rights and our futures, their futures. As far as care, every child in care, every adopted or foster child should automatically receive the right to a statutory assessment and an educational healthcare package, and support of independent therapists in statutory education, health and care. A plan that meets their needs, not ignoring or cost-cutting. The same sort of cost-cutting and ignorance that you are seeing as home educators. Again, we stand with you. The reality, the vast majority of these children never receive assessments they need. The LEA fails them time and time again, forcing families, carers and professionals into endless battles, the same battles that you face, just to secure the most basic support. We already know the facts. 99% of children who've been in care need a trauma-informed assessment to understand their emotional, cognitive and sensory needs. Yet assessments are rare and support is even rarer. Adoption UK's own research proves that most children who have been in care cannot cope in large mainstream schools. CAMS is breaking under the weight of demands, with years and years of waiting lists. Many children in crisis never even make it to an appointment. Some don't make it at all, and I mean that literally. There are children being sent to A&E departments. There are children undergoing serious levels of self-harm because the systems that they're enforced into, educationally, aren't meeting their needs. They're further traumatizing them.
Yes. Yeah.
Despite all of this, schools and LEAs continue to operate under an outdated, punitive model, one that sees all our children as badly behaved, rather than deeply traumatized or being atypical in their neurodevelopment. They are isolated, excluded, and treated as problems to be managed rather than children needing support. Trauma is not an invisible disability, but the government chooses to see it just as that. Thousands of children in care suffer from this complex difficulty, these challenges, and they're in education systems just like the one that you're trying to avoid. They have CPTSD, they have PTSD, sensory processing disorders, not all of them, but many of them. They have developmental trauma. None of that is up for debate. The science is crystal clear, and the lived experiences are even clearer. But yet this government, and the past government, still refuses to acknowledge what psychologists, therapists, educators, home educators, parents and carers are shouting about, and they've been doing that for years. The new bill expects these children to simply fit into mainstream education. But how can a child who has suffered, I'm going to leave out some of the comments because of our company, how are they expected to suffer and thrive in a chaotic, overstimulating environment without the right support? An environment that doesn't recognise their individuality and their talents. Most SEND coordinators, SENCOs, are not trauma trained, not because they don't care, but because the training and funding simply isn't there. Educational psychologists, trauma specialists, and mental health professionals are being ignored or dismissed by our county and by the government's policies, when indeed what they're doing is advocate for children. Many families don't even know what an EHCP is, and they're misinformed or they're actively discouraged from applying. Even when families fight through the bureaucracy, EHCPs are rare often denied on technicalities and delayed for years, or made so vague that they become absolutely meaningless. Why? Because the system, again, is designed to prevent funding. It's designed to fail the children rather than support them. True support means understanding what all of our children live with, experience, and what our parents and carers are telling government. But there is no co-production. This is ivory tower politics, and people are spoken down to as opposed to engaged, brought together and united. The consequences of our governments and local councils' decisions are pretty devastating. What this means is, it means children who are SHing, there's a term for that, I'm sure many of you know what that means, end up in A&E, overdosing and attempting to end their experience in a permanent way. Again, I'm being selected because of the company. It means young people are being criminalised for behaviours that are trauma responses, not delinquency. It means loving families and carers are being blamed, gaslighted, while the true culprits, the government and the LEAs, try to remain unaccountable. Many schools do not offer such children safe spaces. For these children, when they are expected to behave like neurotypical, non-traumatized peers without any accommodations for their needs, it's just too much. It breaks them. The law already exists to protect them. The Equality Act, the Education Act, the Children and Families Act, and multiple areas of statutory guidance. But these laws are ignored because upholding them would cost money. And instead of addressing this issue, the government is pushing through a bill, the bill we're talking about today, that will only make matters significantly worse for children who can't cope in the environment that they have left. The bill is designed to hide the truth. The bill is not about safeguarding. Safeguarding is vital. Laws already exist to safeguard our children. And if they're not being safeguarded, they're being failed. This is a con. It masquerades as protection while stripping away what little support remains. If you look at the family group decision-making section of the bill, the power is handed to local authorities to decide if me, my family, you and your family should even be included in the decision-making meetings that are being held about them, and ask ourselves and everyone else around us how right that is. It's completely wrong. This isn't democracy. This is dictatorial shaming. It's abuse.
Yes.
It silences professionals who are often paid by government taxes to write reports to support the children's futures. But those reports are often ignored. They're not in the right column. They weren't stated the right way. They weren't delivered in the right timescales. Or they're not even available to access because of the waits that we have to get such reports. It punishes children for not being able to cope with a system that was never ever built for them. It's one system where middle-of-the-road kids may manage, but kids who have slightly diverse differences, that are independent thinkers, that are not designed to fit into that system, they are not recognised. If the government truly cared about these children, they would invest in smaller specialist trauma-informed schools, mandatory trauma training for all school staff, particularly SENCOs, and leadership, a fast-tracked EHC process for all children in care, adopted or fostered. That really never happens. More funding for CAMS, educational psychologists, and multidisciplinary teams that actually work together. We need agencies uniting and working together where children have such high needs because of the trauma they've lived through. But what's not happening, instead, they are pushing children into environments they cannot manage, punishing them when they inevitably break under the pressure of expectation. You cannot expect a child to score high, to be educationally supreme if they don't even have the safety and the stability and the ability to regulate in the environment that they're enforced to go into.
Holly, can we wrap up in a second? Thank you.
Can you imagine what this would feel like if you, as a human being, had experienced horrendous life experiences, those which some of our children in the care system have experienced? Horrific, torturous experiences. And then the next day, you were expected to carry on as usual, carry on like all your other colleagues, like nothing had happened to you. Can you imagine what the people who wrote this bill and are drafting this bill would do if their children were seen in a space where they were being ignored, demoralised, where their mental health was at risk, where they were struggling and suffering? What would they do? You would remove your children from that space. You would ensure they were loved and nurtured and cared for. And quite frankly, that's what we all need to maintain. Our children are cared for, loved and nurtured. So I'm standing here with you today. I've spoken about care, I've spoken about fostering, I've spoken about adoption and trauma. But most importantly, what I'm speaking about is the rights of our children, and as a Lib Dem, and as a mum, and also as a member of DSPCC, I really stand with you, and I'm proud to stand with you, and I'll continue standing with you. Let's send Devon a message. The County Council are failing us. They're failing to send children and home educators. Let's ensure the government hear what we have to say, and let's motivate to try and force this bill into a discussion with the community and campaign groups. Thank you.